Welcome everybody to today's Three Nations battle, hosted by Stoke Poges in the UK, competing with Queensland from Australia and Westville from South Africa. My name is Martin Patton, I'll be your judge today. Interesting session doing it this way, but it's great to be able to continue in spite of what's happening in the world, and good luck all three clubs. Really looking forward to this. Some very interesting images. I've had a quick look through. I don't want to pollute the judging too much by looking through each one on a one-to-one. Tonight I'll be scoring the images from 14 to 20, which should give us a nice broad range, and I'm viewing them on a high resolution calibrated monitor, so we shouldn't have any issues with white balance or brightness. So let's get started with our first image. Good luck everybody. Yeah, a very nice image to start with. Obviously constructed by the author. We've seen a few of these in the UK if you're looking at this abroad. It's a very cute and interesting story, really pulled together well. Enjoying the use of the metal objects to create a scene that we know from nature, and you really feel that the author has pulled this together. A few little challenges with this one. It's maybe not quite as sharp as we would like. For a desktop, it certainly should be super sharp. Hopefully our author would have used a tripod, etc. And we are suffering here with a few highlights. I know it's very difficult with the metal, but I do think that has affected it. The background maybe is just a little bit on the dull side. I think we could have done with something a little bit more exciting to tie together. I've seen quite a few versions of this using, them as nests with diffuse backgrounds, and I think that might have given us something a little bit more exciting. But I certainly think this is a good image to start with, and we'll be starting with a 16. Okay, a nice little piece of night sky photography here. Author has put a very nice key line round it for us, just to hold us in and show us the square format that they've chosen. The night sky is absolutely beautifully exposed, lots and lots of detail here, and we're really enjoying it. Of course, for these, that we're always looking for something a little bit more, and our author has given us that foreground interest to really anchor I think it's the Milky Way, but I could be wrong, to anchor the image very strongly into our foreground, which I think has really added very much to this. And this one is a 20 for me. Very nicely done. Okay, nice landscape. Interesting lighting. Lots of editing potentially on this one, I think. So strong, bold colours. Diffuse, blurred sky, and that does, cause me some questions. There are some areas here where I think our sky has become a little bit burnt out, and maybe we've edited and brought some yellow into here to try to overcome that. So I think lighting wise this one is struggling a little bit, and compositionally we've got an awful lot of this foreground, and I'm not sure we necessarily needed it. It doesn't necessarily add a huge amount to the picture, and I do feel that we could have letterboxed our image much more strongly than this to give us a much more powerful composition. So this one's not working for me. I feel the colours in the foreground versus the colours in the background are not matching very strongly either. So this one is a 14 for me. Okay, powerful piece of architecture. I'd love to get to this location myself. Valencia is the science park is a fabulous location, and monochrome has really baked this down to shape and form. I am feeling our sky in this case maybe have not been so ideal as we would have liked. I think a much plainer sky would have really set off the building, whereas at the moment, because of the strength and the power of the monochrome conversion, I am struggling a little bit to pick everything out. And because it is almost 50-50 compositionally across the middle of the picture, I do find my eyes bouncing between the reflection and the structure itself. So that does put me off, and I just think the image is just a little bit too powerful and a little overwhelming. Nicely exposed though, super sharp front to back as you would expect, and that works very, very well. And then we've got this really nice person as a nice surprise within the image to give it scale, which I think does work well. So whilst it is powerful, I think it's just maybe not quite there with some of the images that we have in the rest of the competition. So this one is a 17 for me. Okay, nice night scene, power station, oil station of some kind. Works very, very well. Nice vertical, strong composition from the venting pipes. Certainly gives us an impression of height and size. You know, and in comparison to the rest of it, I think it is quite strong. Letterbox format works quite well. I think the orange glow is one of those white balance things that I'm not convinced it necessarily was that colour. You know, doing things in that night sky can sometimes give you this effect. I'm not always personally convinced that it does work very, very strongly. Um, yeah, compositionally, I think it is okay. I like the strength and power of certainly the right hand vent, roughly on a third. I think that is quite strong. I am enjoying the starburst, but I think the overall tonage of the brown just may not have been there. Shooting at the blue hour, if you like, just that little bit after the sun has gone below the horizon, might have given us something just a little bit more powerful than we're getting here. But still a decent image, 16. Yeah, this is an interesting one. You know, trying to guess context is always interesting, and whether you should do it as a judge or not is always difficult. The fact that our sitter here has got an unlit cigar, still with the paper on it in his mouth, is kind of interesting. You wonder why that's the case, and then you look down and say, ah, he's still smoking in his other hand. Is this one of those set up Cuba shots where, you know, they charge you $5 to have their picture taken? And I kind of feel this does feel a bit that way. My impression from this is that the model, if you want to call it that, is actually engaged with someone else, not our author who's taken the picture. And because they're looking away, it just feels a bit unusual. I think I would like to see some engagement directly with the model, and I think that will be much more powerful. Technically, it all works very, very well. Even with the what looks like a very damp skin, it has come across quite well, and our lighting has been well handled, even with the hat, to be able to get lighting into the eyes. But as you can see, they are very flat and dull, as we've got no light directly into the eyes, which means it's maybe not so successful as we would like. And this one is another 16. Yeah, atmospheric, interesting. Certainly, we don't see many subjects on ice and in skates, and is some form of you know, a display, I guess. Nice point of view in that we are level with our dancer or our ice skater, and I think that works quite well. We are getting a few sort of speckling going on in the background there of the mist, and I'm not quite sure what that is. The colour tones are a little bit strange. It almost looks like colour noise. Maybe you were struggling with the lighting, which has definitely not been set up for you and has been set up for the dance. But it does work quite powerfully. The format that you've chosen, I think, supports the picture quite well. And the lighting, but whilst being very direct from our left, has been handled reasonably well, so that the skin tones do come across quite nicely. But I do feel that this sort of noisy speckling really has reduced the quality of the image, maybe just a bit too much for us, and isn't quite there for me. The skater looking downwards, I think, also means we're not quite so engaged with their face as we would like, and it being in shadow does detract a little bit. So this one is a 16. Yeah, nice long exposure. Author has picked their spot very nicely. We've got the clouds heading towards us, which is always good in a long exposure. A few little bright white areas, but nothing too terribly overwhelming. I think that worked quite nicely, and the choice of monochrome has really brought out the crunchiness and the power of these rocks. The point of view has been very nicely done. I think, you know, giving this nice circle of the waves and the water in here, I think is cool. It's a difficult one with long exposures. I do feel that the waves probably have been lapping in and around this rock, and I do wonder whether a shorter long exposure would have given us, you know, a little bit more of a powerful image, you know, in that we could see more of the movement of the waves. I think for the sky it's worked very well, this super long exposure, but I think a balance of the two might have given us a more powerful shot. But it does work very well. The wet rocks are very interesting, very jagged, and do come together quite nicely. I'm not sure we needed quite so much sky. I think the foreground and the rocks are really where the interest is, but nonetheless a very powerful image. 18. Yeah, super macro shot. Um, and on top of something else, I guess is one of this, it's milking it or looking after it. I know that there are quite many symbiotic relationships. Um, Lovely detail, nice diffuse background, a little bit speckly in the background, but I think we can get away with that a little bit. Great point of view, really enjoying that. Directly at eye level, nice catch light in the ant's eye, and that interaction between them is great. A little bit highlighty on our creature. It's very difficult to do that when you've got super bright lighting, but I think nonetheless it's such a powerful image. The composition works very well, and I think this one has to be our first 20 of the day, and well done. Yeah, nice photographer's shot, this one. I think the lighting has been certainly delightful and wonderful, and you've made the most of that. Nice leading lines bringing us into our hut, positioned just off a third, but that's okay. I think it works quite nicely, and I could see from the sky why you've wanted to bring a little bit more into it. It's very pleasant, it's very nice. The walkway, I don't know, it's just little small things, isn't it? I just wonder, could you have cropped in just a tiny little bit from either side so that our walkway went into the corners rather than just leaving that little gap? But it's okay, it does work, it's a nice image. I do feel that we possibly wanted another element, something to give it scale maybe. It just feels a little bit tranquil, but that's probably the effect you were going for, and I think this is definitely a strong image, but just not quite up there with some we've got in the rest of the competition. So an 18. Yeah, nice moody water shot here, monochrome to really bring out the shape and form. I think that works quite nicely. Enjoying the misty background, I think just ties us in and brings us into the foreground. And I think your choice of long exposure has been well done. We've not lost any of the highlights. We still can see all of the detail of the water coming over the weir here, and I think that works very nicely. The bridge itself is very powerful. It's quite an interesting composition when you see the bridge and the weir both lead up to the tree, so that does create a nice triangle effect, and I think does work quite nicely. Monochrome is quite powerfully done. We've got black to white, which I think works very well. I just think maybe just a little bit flat compared to some of the others, but still a very strong image again. 19 for this one. Well done. Yeah, very much a photographer's shot, I would call this one again. Who can resist some rust and some industrial? And I think that comes across quite strongly. Nice vertical composition, gives us some power here. I think that works very well. For me, I guess the depth of field I wanted to be a little bit stronger. Our secondary two chains here aren't quite as in focus I would like. You've obviously gone quite narrow to blur out and just remove the background from us in almost monochrome, almost like one of those color pops as we've seen, very popular at one point in the 80s. But I think for me the depth of field on this isn't quite where we want it to be, and therefore that does distract somewhat. 16 for this one. Another up close macro, two beautifully detailed creatures, work very, very well, obviously interacting with each other. Depth of field is reasonable, always difficult with a macro, and certainly all the main elements appear to be in focus, which I think works very strongly. Our one challenge here is the background that you've got them on. Compared to our last two creatures interacting, which felt like a very natural background, this one looks like it's plastic or a windowsill of some kind maybe, and this may be their natural habitat, but just doesn't come across beautifully. It does distract somewhat from enjoying the interaction. Lighting looks fairly diffuse. We've got some highlights going on here and there, but nothing too major, which I think does help you, but just not quite as strong as our last one. So this one is an 18. Yeah, certainly a powerful dialogue and story going on here. Our tortoise, depending on how you pronounce it and where you are, certainly appears to have pulled his head in and hiding here while he's being worried and attacked. Nature's a very cruel thing, and sometimes you have to just stand back and observe, and you just have to take it as it is. Lighting has been very mottled on this, which is not always great, but we do have some nice lighting on the creature here, and I think that would have worked quite nicely if it had been a little bit wider onto the tortoise, but it's not the end of the world. I know our temptation is always to get everything in. We've got some really bright, distracting areas over here on the right-hand side, and I do wonder whether we really needed them. I wonder if a more powerful crop would have been here. We don't need all of the creature, and I just feel that this would have really brought the action out and made it much stronger. But nice, nonetheless, nice and sharp where you expect it to be. Absolutely well seen and taken, and another 18. Yeah, a powerful moment between two people. You've got to say probably a studio setup. Um, the engagement with her, I think, is very strong. I think that works quite well. Um, his engagement is with her. I guess this shape that we're seeing here is really the strong part of the composition, and I think that does work quite well. The skin tones between the two are kind of, I think, a little bit of the challenge. He looks very tanned and works out, and she has very pale skin, and maybe that's to do with the contrast of the lighting that you're using as well. So I think it's quite strong, but not as strong as some others. The depth of field is going out a little bit on his hand here versus where it is on her face, and I do wonder whether that was a choice you made, or whether it really, the depth of field is because you focused on the face, it isn't quite where we would want it to be. Hands and faces are always very difficult. This hand is very large in the frame, and it would be very easy to be distracted between the two, but I think works okay. I think I probably would have darkened this area down. It's quite bright and distracting at the edge of the frame, and does pull us away from where you really want us to be. And I think you could have easily darkened much of this down to really concentrate our view into the faces a little bit more. So not quite as strong as I would have liked maybe, but yeah, a strong 17. Yeah, wow. A weir, a water, a lake or some kind. Very powerful water. with our heron-like creature. I'm not quite sure what it is, but certainly looks very beautiful. The water splashes are very powerful, and almost it's kind of that image of two parts, really, isn't it? The water splash and the background of the water and the waves really do come together, and maybe this is surf. I don't know. It's difficult to know, isn't it, when you just have the image in front of you. But I'm looking at our creature and saying that unfortunately I'm not sure he necessarily, or she, is quite as sharp as we would like. Maybe your camera has focused on the water and picked that up, and therefore we aren't quite as sharp as we would like. The creature itself is nicely positioned in the frame. I think that works quite well. We do have a few sort of bright areas over here where maybe some photoshopery has been done really to knock those back, but they are still quite distracting. I do wonder, it's very cool and blue. You could have warmed this up a little and brought a little more of some wonderful lighting into it, as it is all just a little bit stark and shadowy. So 16 for me for this one. Yeah, and beautiful bird of prey coming into land somewhere. No evidence of jesses or anything, so you have to say, is this natural? Background nicely diffuse. All of that works very, very well. Wing spread works well in this composition. Yeah, it's quite a nice image, isn't it? Catchlight in the eye, nice feather detail on the body, losing a little bit of definition in the wings as we go out, but that's okay. I don't mind that. A little bit of more movement in the wings might have really given us something a little more dramatic than we see right here. It just feels very static and frozen. So yeah, not quite as powerful as we would have hoped, but nonetheless a very strong image. 18. Okay, a shield bug of some kind. Author has chosen, I guess it's on their phone by the look of it, to give us a monochrome rendition, maybe to bring out the shape and form, maybe to reduce the distractions. And I'm not convinced necessarily that was the right thing to do. Shield bugs are generally very beautiful and iridescent, and I really feel like I'm missing out on seeing the beauty of this creature. Which is a little bit of a shame. Compositionally wise, I can see you've probably tried to keep your on button in or whatever at the bottom here, but I'm not sure we needed it. I think coming across here maybe might have given us a more powerful shot, and I am feeling that this is just a little bit too bright in the frame. So a good idea. And certainly something of that, man versus nature comes out quite well. But I just think that not quite as powerful as maybe you would have hoped. So 15 for me for this one. Yeah, beautiful portrait of a bird. Nice feather detail, beautiful sharp beak, catchlight in the eye. So it ticks all the boxes that you would expect to see. A little bit speckly in the background maybe, and the position in the frame. I guess I just want to see just a little bit more space in front of it. We've got more behind, but I think we probably could have cropped down right to here. Might have helped us get rid of some of these brighter areas, and just giving a little bit more space on the left there would have just given us a little more breathing room for the creature, which I think would have helped. We are, I think, starting to lose a little bit of detail here and there as well. So a very pleasant shot, but I think without some of the power and the strength of some of the others that we've got coming up later as well. So this one is a 17. Yeah, nice creature. Almost looking at us. Yeah, almost as if we've been spotted, and certainly I think it works quite nicely. The diffuse background helps. I do wonder whether that's been edited a little bit. When I look between the legs, as an example, it does look much more powerful and much brighter than it has been up here. So I do wonder whether someone has, gone across there and tried to misty it up a little bit. but you know, we shouldn't guess too much into that. It is very diffuse, the background, the colours work very well. Yeah, the reason I do feel a bit awkward with it is the areas here seem fine, but this bit seems quite dark, and that does sort of throw me out a little bit, which does make me feel that it has maybe been edited, maybe just that little bit too much. I think our biggest challenge is the lack of lighting in the face here. Um, you know, whilst we are seeing some lighting up here, the majority of the creature down here appears to be in shadow, which is a little bit of a shame. Not quite so powerful as we would like. So a pleasant shot and an interesting one, and certainly a creature I'm not familiar with. But I just think photographically wise and editing wise, just maybe not up there with some we've seen tonight. So this one is a 16. Yeah, what a powerful shot when this comes up, isn't it? Very much an artistic shot, very to the author's taste, I would guess, using multiple effects from Photoshop or similar to give us this electric, and oil painting-y kind of effect. Won't appeal to everyone, but I think it's quite strong. It does come out, the pylons have come out very strongly in this, and have that otherworldly feel, and the cool blue and electric tones do work almost like we're watching electricity, follow in from this image and through to the rest, which I think is quite powerful, and I think it does come out quite strongly. It maybe is just a little overdone. Some of the areas here, and this sort of heavy line, I think a little bit of maybe smoothing out and editing might have helped reduce the impact of the background somewhat, and some of the sort of almost halo-like effects here just do detract a little bit. But I like this line that leads us all the way through. I think that is quite powerful. But I can easily see, some judges being very put off by this, and other people loving it, which is always a challenge. But I think it works pretty well for me. I think it is quite strong, and this one is an 18. Raw, yeah, interesting. Very warm tones and brown tones through all of it, obviously to key in with our model's hair, plenty of piercings and jewelry going on, which all add to it. Nothing too overly bright or overly detailed, and I think that does work quite well. Good engagement with us, obviously. I think that works well. Good catchlight in the eyes. And it does come together very well. The background, excuse me, whether that's been added afterwards, or whether you've shot against it, I really don't mind. I think that does come across quite powerfully. It's a little bit muddy and it's a little bit marmitey. The hands are in some ways competing a little bit with the face. But I do think that you can get away with it given the pose. The long nails and those kind of things are pretty good as well. I do wonder whether painting those up in something would have helped you out even more so, but I guess we can only ask the model to go so far. So yeah, it does have some impact, and it does have some strength, and you've really thought through the composition and pulling it together. And I think just tonight I'm going to be generous because I do think it's a powerful person shot, and we've not got too many of those in tonight's. So I think, yeah, this one for me, another 20. Well done. Yeah, beautiful creatures, aren't they? Our elephants here. Is this natural? Is it in a park? I do feel the stones do look a little bit maybe natural and a bit maybe a bit unnatural rather than there, but that's okay. Very diffuse background, very similar to that sort of ant bear kind of thing earlier. I do feel, and I wonder whether this has also had that very soft misty feel applied to it, because there's areas here once again under the legs that don't have that same feel. I mean, if I compare this to this, I can definitely see the lighting is different, and it just makes me feel really uncomfortable and awkward, and that I'm looking at an editing exercise rather than a natural creature. It is the kind of thing where you can get away with monochrome, and bring that out to give you, much more detail in our elephant here. We are got some white areas at the top. I'm not sure if that's salt or whether it's a highlight or whatever, but it just, I don't know, it just takes away from some of that impact of what should be a moment. There isn't really an interaction going on here. Maybe mum is squirting up over her back here, although we're not really seeing any water dripping. Just not quite so powerful as we would like. It's a bit centrally composed. Did we need to have all this distance around? I'm not convinced. You could have very easily come in and brought it in, and that would have helped you lose some of that, not necessarily fantastic background. But still a nice character study of our creatures here. 17. Beautiful sort of family portrait, this, isn't it, really? Light's quite direct on the face, so we are losing it a little bit here, I think, on the nose and on the cheek. It's maybe a bit bright, and I think, unfortunately for you, presenting portraits on this side is always a tough one. I'm finding myself tilting my head over to the right here to try and look and enjoy this beautiful young lady's face, and so I'm struggling a little bit with that. A little bit hot on the shoulder here, and this dress, whilst very cute and powerful, is probably too much. I might well have cropped here somewhere. I don't think we needed this, and it hasn't added, and I am feeling that we'd get a little bit more into our face if we did that. So nicely done from a depth of field and a sharpness. That all works very well. Our sofa is very out of focus in the background, which really helps diffuse it and gives us a nice backdrop. So it does lift it somewhat, but I think just that lighting here has just let you down a little bit, but still a very nice image. And I can imagine from a commercial perspective, the parents would absolutely love this. But as a competition image, I think not quite there, but still a very strong 18. Well done. Yeah, an emu or similar, very close in, diffuse, colourful background, nothing too distracting, works quite well. Got some light in the eyes, so that's all good, and a very funky creature. Punk rockers are us with that haircut, and I think that does come across quite strongly. However, the light on its beak is just a little bit overwhelming, and the depth of field maybe just isn't quite what we would like it to be. Certainly in these areas, I'm seeing it doesn't really feel super sharp, and here either. And maybe you were trying to shoot it with a very wide open aperture to try and blow out the background, but I think it just not quite there. But still, I've got some character and some fun about it. Just I think depth of field has let you down. 17. Yeah, a different one, this one. I'm not quite sure what's going on with its eye. Does it have a dead eye, or has it caught the flash? And I know there are quite a few companies do these as workshops. They set up a bunch of flash guns and off you go to get these lovely reflection shots. Nice positioning of the creature looking into the frame, with space over on our left hand side. Using the flash as blown out the background to complete blackness, and I think that works quite nicely, but does kind of detract in some ways away from seeing where it is and the location, and but it's a very stylish shot. I think the tongue is great. It's obviously been lapping at the water, and I think that works really powerfully. Key line helps tie us in a little bit, although I probably would have gone with pale grey, not with it looks like it's pretty white, just to remove, it does stand out quite strongly. And this eye, I don't know whether it's because it's got a dead eye or whether it's just caught the flash, but it just does put me off somewhat, and make me feel a bit uncomfortable with this as an image. But it is still very powerful and strong. 18. Yeah, beautiful egret. Is it a cattle egret maybe? nice diffuse background, beautiful wing position, all of those things work. It really does come across quite nicely, but unfortunately for you, I don't think that the eye is quite as sharp as we would like it to be, and there are some areas where I'm very suspect of the quality, really down to that blown highlights. You almost, white birds in the sky are very difficult to get right. I think you've had a really good stab at it, and it does come across very well, but I just feel we're just not quite there exposure wise or sharpness wise, which is a shame. But just for the composition alone, I think it's been very nicely composed. 17. Yeah, beautiful morning or evening. Really lovely reflections in the wet sand, I guess. All of that works very well for me. Our fisherman positioned very nicely against the sun to pull that together, and I think it's very strong. But then I look at it a little bit more detailed, take a little bit more time, and I wonder, did we really need this right hand part of the image? I kind of feel like we could crop here because this isn't pretty, it's not beautiful, it doesn't have the light that the rest does, and maybe even come to here to put our fisherman on our third looking out across, and even when composing maybe to have just slid the camera across to the left. Maybe there's something over here that you can't or didn't want in your image, but I think it would have put him in a much more, whilst traditional point in the frame, one that I think would have worked much more strongly than this has. But the lighting is delightful, isn't it? And you can absolutely see why this was taken. I just think it's just a little bit too much of the right and not enough of the left for me, but still a very powerful image. 18. Yep, nice macro up close, beautiful detail in our eye. That compound always comes across quite well. We're seeing lots of focus stacking of this kind of shot, which really brings out all of the detail. And I think the proboscis here and this area works very well, but the legs being out of focus and the wings being out of focus do detract a little bit. I might have darkened some of the areas down a little bit just to push the judge a little bit more strongly into the areas where sharpness is there. So a strong image, but not quite up there with some of the natural history and macro that we've seen, even though that eye is delightful. And that's another 18. Yeah, quite a portrait this, isn't it? I am sitting in the dark, even though it's in the morning for me, really to make sure that I'm trying to see these images as close as I could be to they would be in a projected hall. Lovely detail in the beard, catchlight in the eyes, all works very well. Very moody and dark treatment, and I am glad I did this in the dark so that I can see the details of the hat come out very nicely. I kind of almost think a keyline might have helped, a very fine pale grey one, but I think I can see enough of the difference between my screen and where it ends, so I think this has come across very strongly. The engagement is there. It's hard to get the facial expression, but that's because of the beard, but the quality of the image I think works very nicely. We've got some modeling lighting going on here, very much a broad lit image across the distance from his ear to his nose, and I think that does work very well and is a very traditional lighting method that's come across quite strongly. And this one I think is another 20 for me. Well done. So I'm going to take a break there and have a glass of water, and it means that the video is in two parts, and I will resume in the second half and we'll create another video from that. Thank you very much for your attention.